The restaurant shimmered with soft gold light and quiet wealth, the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones and made success sound effortless. Our family took the table in the corner, as we always did, where no one could see the cracks. My father, Charles Whitfield, sat at the head. His tie was still perfect after a 12-hour workday, his posture straight enough to make everyone else look careless. Beside him, my mother, Elaine, smiled the way she always did when she wasn't sure what to say. Across from me, my younger sister, Lena, was glowing fresh manicure, perfect hair, and the air of someone who knew the evening was built for her. I should have noticed the white envelope tucked under my father's hand. I should have guessed what it meant, but I was too busy pretending we were just another happy family sharing dinner on a Friday night. When the waiter cleared our plates, Charles cleared his throat. "Lena," he said, sliding the envelope across the table like it was a peace offering, "this is for your down payment." Lena's eyes widened. "For the house." He nodded once. 150,000. It's time you had something that's yours. The words hit like cold water. The room went still. I stared at the envelope, at the neat, deliberate handwriting on its front, and felt something in my chest go silent. Then Charles looked at me. That small pause, that assessing glance, was all it took. "You've always been different, Nora," he said. "You don't need our help. You're the strong one." I forced a smile. "Guess so." He leaned back, his voice calm and final. "We invest in winners." The clink of silverware stopped. Even the air seemed to freeze. Elaine reached for her wine, eyes darting between us. Lena shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. For a long moment, no one breathed. And then I did what I'd trained myself to do my entire life: stay composed, swallow hard, pretend it didn't matter. I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my empty plate, and said, "Thank you for dinner." When I stood, the chair legs scraped the floor, a small, sharp sound that somehow echoed louder than his words. Elaine whispered, "Nora," but I was already walking away. Outside, the night air burned against my skin. The restaurant lights spilled behind me, warm and golden, while the parking lot stretched out in shadow. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept walking to my car, to the silence that had always waited for me. Inside the car, I caught my reflection in the mirror, calm face, steady eyes, the kind of expression people mistake for strength. But inside, something had cracked clean through. That was the night my family decided who was worth investing in. And that was the night I decided I'd never need their approval again. The sound of tires on the highway faded into a memory I'd buried years ago. The gymnasium of Ridgefield Middle School, the smell of paint and sawdust, the nervous buzz before the judges announced the winner. I was 12, standing beside my project, a small suspension bridge built from wire, glue, and drinking straws. It wasn't pretty, but it held the weight of a full textbook when no one else's could. The crowd gasped, and I remember the shimmer of that moment, believing, maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally look at me and see something worth loving when they called my name for first place. I scanned the rows of folding chairs, every seat filled with clapping parents, except the two in the front row with handwritten name cards, Charles and Elaine Whitfield, empty. I stood there, metal trembling in my hand, smiling for the photographer like it didn't matter. That night, I brought the trophy home, proud and glowing. Dad was on the couch, the TV flickering blue light across his face. "Strange hobby for a girl," he muttered without looking away from the screen. Mom sat beside him, brushing Lena's hair into perfect curls as my sister practiced her pageant smile. I remember the quiet more than the words, the quiet where love should have been. It became a pattern. Lena's ribbons and crowns lined the hallway like proof of perfection, while my certificates stayed folded in drawers. I learned to stop showing them, to stop needing applause that would never come. Once, I overheard Dad tell a neighbor, "Nora's smart, but not the kind of smart that counts." The sentence lodged inside me like a splinter. Every test I aced, Every project I finished after midnight, it was all a silent argument he never heard. That was when I started building things: bridges, towers, models from scraps, anything that could hold its own weight. Because I couldn't. Years later, at that dinner table, when he said, "We invest in winners," the words weren't new. They were just the grown-up version of every quiet dismissal I'd collected since that empty gym. I'd spent a lifetime trying to build something strong enough to reach them. I just didn't realize I'd have to build it without them. College was supposed to be my clean slate, a place far enough from home that I could breathe without comparing every inhale to Lena's. I worked nights at a diner off campus, pouring coffee for strangers who called me sweetheart and tipped in change. Every dollar went to tuition, rent, and the dream of standing on my own 2 feet. My parents never offered help. They didn't need to. They'd already paid Lena's full ride at a private university 2 states away. Each phone call home was the same. "Your sister just made the dean's list," Mom would say, her voice full of pride. Then, softer. "How's your little apartment? Nora still safe?" It wasn't a question. It was a reminder of the difference between us. Dad's voice would cut in, steady and dismissive. "You should think about something stable, like business. Engineering's a tough field for women." I learned to keep my calls short and my expectations shorter. When Lena dropped out a semester later, they didn't scold her. They called it a necessary break. Dad bought her a new car to lift her spirits. I watched from a distance, wondering how failure could be rewarded so beautifully. After graduation, I landed a junior position at a structural firm in Denver. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I sent my parents photos of the first project. I helped design a pedestrian bridge, cutting clean lines through the skyline. Days later, Dad texted back 2 words: "Still renting." That was his favorite question. Not, "Are you happy?" or "Are you proud of what you built?" Just that one metric of worth ownership. I started to understand that in our family. Love was currency, and I was broke. So I worked harder, hoping that maybe success could buy back what affection never could. But every paycheck, every achievement felt like throwing stones into an empty well. There was no echo, no response, just the sound of my own voice fading. And in that silence, I began to realize some shadows don't disappear when you outgrow them. They just learn how to follow you quietly. The night after the dinner, Denver's skyline blurred through my windshield like a watercolor lights bleeding into rain. Every drop another reminder that I'd finally run out of reasons to stay. My phone buzzed again and again with texts from Mom. "He didn't mean it like that. Come back. Nora." But she'd said the same thing my whole life. After every wound, small, sharp apologies meant to keep the peace while the cracks widened. I turned the phone face down. The silence felt cleaner. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the glass-wet hair, tired eyes, the faint trace of mascara trailing down my cheek. For once, I didn't see a failure. I saw a woman holding herself together without applause, the kind of strength they'd mistaken for arrogance all along. I drove until the city lights fell away and the open road stretched ahead, dark and endless. The storm followed me, wind pushing at the car as if trying to turn me back. But there was nothing left to go back to. No house, no family that still felt like mine. Somewhere between Colorado Springs and Denver, I pulled over at a rest stop. The rain had softened to mist. I stepped out, letting the air bite at my skin, and whispered a single promise into the night. I'm done earning love I've already paid for the first time. The silence didn't scare me. It sounded like space, like the pause before building something new. I got back in the car, started the engine, and drove north, toward a city that didn't know my name, toward a life that hadn't been decided for me. That was the night I stopped trying to be chosen, and started choosing myself. Denver looked different when you were unemployed. The same skyline that once felt like promise now loomed like glass and steel judgment. It had been 3 months since I'd left my family, and for a while, I believed I was finally free. I rented a small apartment downtown, took long walks through the cold, and convinced myself that independence was enough to fill the hollow space they'd left. But freedom without direction is just another kind of emptiness. When the layoffs started at the firm, I told myself I was safe, I was reliable, I worked late. I said yes to everything. But the morning they handed out the letters, my name sat right there in the middle. No warning, no explanation. Position terminated. Just 2 words that closed a chapter I wasn't ready to end. I walked out into the snow with the paper crushed in my hand. The cold hit harder than I expected, slicing through my coat, through the illusion that I'd built something solid. I stood on the curb watching buses pass, wondering how many times in one life you're supposed to start over. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes I never unpacked. The radiator hummed like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I opened my phone and scrolled through the Bennett family group chat photos of Lena's new house, champagne, and my parents smiling like winners. The caption read, "So proud of our youngest." I stared at it for a long time, not with envy, but with exhaustion. Then I typed one message, "Thank you for teaching me to stand on my own, even in the cruelest way possible." I hit send, blocked their numbers, deleted the thread. For the first time, there was no audience, no scorecard, no mirror, just me and the echo of a life collapsing quietly, and beneath that collapse, something faint, something that felt almost like freedom began to stir. The days blurred together after the layoff cold coffee, unopened emails, the kind of silence that grew teeth. I applied for every job I could find, assistant engineer, drafter, even receptionist. No one called back. Denver was still limping out of a recession, and my resume felt like a ghost no one wanted to touch. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Hope was running on fumes. One gray afternoon, I ducked into a small cafe called Keller's Corner, mostly to escape the wind. The place looked tired, faded wallpaper, flickering lights, the faint smell of burnt espresso. Behind the counter stood Sam Keller, a man in his 60s with paint-stained hands and a gentle kind of weariness. "Coffee?" he asked. "Only if it comes with a miracle," I said before I could stop myself. He chuckled, studying me for a moment. "You're Nora Whitfield." "Right, the engineer I read about that pedestrian bridge you worked on downtown." I blinked. No one had said my name like that in months. "Used to be," I answered. "Used to?" Sam smiled. "Well, I could use someone like you. This place is falling apart, and I've got about $1,000 left to fix it." Interested, $1,000 wasn't enough to cover my rent, let alone my pride. But something in his tone, earnest, trusting, cut through the fog of defeat. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I'm interested." For the next few weeks, Keller's Corner became my world. I stripped wallpaper, repainted walls, rewired old lights. My hands blistered, my back ached. But for the first time in months, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of purpose. Each night, Sam would lock the door, look around the cafe, and say, "You've got magic in your hands, kid." Maybe he was wrong. Maybe it wasn't magic. Maybe it was just what happens when someone finally gives you a chance to build again. By the time spring crept into Denver, Keller's Corner no longer smelled like regret. It smelled like paint, fresh coffee, and something close to hope. I'd torn out the broken furniture, sanded down the counters, and covered one wall with mirrors to pull in more light. Every inch of the place carried fingerprints and bruises from my own hands, proof that I could still make something stand again. Sam watched me work with quiet pride. "You remind me of my wife," he said one night while sweeping sawdust into a pile. "She could fix anything except people." I smiled. Guess I'm learning both the hard way. When the final pendant light flickered on, the room transformed. The cafe felt alive again, like it had been waiting for someone to notice it still had a pulse. Sam stood in the center, eyes shining. "You've brought it back to life." "Nora," he whispered. A week later, a local magazine ran a small feature titled, "A Forgotten Cafe Finds Its Heart Again." It included one photo me behind the counter, paint on my jeans, a tired but genuine smile on my face. The next morning, my inbox flooded. People were asking if I could help redesign their small shops, renovate their homes, breathe life into forgotten spaces. I didn't have a business name or a plan, just a sketchbook and a set of tools. But for the first time, I said yes to every request. Each project became a small resurrection, every nail and brushstroke another way of reclaiming myself. I wasn't just fixing walls anymore. I was rebuilding the parts of me they once called broken. One of those renovation requests came from a retired veteran in a small town west of Denver. He wanted his crumbling brick house restored before winter. The pay was modest, but the challenge felt honest, so I packed my tools, drove out to Golden, and found a man already inspecting the foundation, a tall, broad-shouldered engineer with calm gray eyes and cement dust on his sleeves. "You must be Nora," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I'm Miles Carter, the site engineer." He extended a hand, firm and steady. Something about his presence quiet, assured, without the arrogance I'd grown used to made me pause. "So you're the one making sure it doesn't collapse," I said. He smiled. "And you're the one making it beautiful. I guess that means we'll get along." We did. Over the following weeks, we worked side by side, me sketching layouts on scrap paper, him checking measurements twice. We argued sometimes about angles and load capacity, but never about respect. There was a rhythm between us that didn't need words, just the sound of hammer against wood, the shared silence that somehow felt safe. One afternoon, while I crouched on the floor redrawing a design, Miles handed me a bottle of water. "You forget the world when you work," he said softly. I didn't look up. That's the point. He hesitated. "You look at a house like it has a soul." I laughed, brushing sawdust from my knees. Maybe because it does. That night, I lay awake replaying that sentence, realizing no one had ever looked at me the way he did, not as a disappointment to be fixed, but as someone already whole. When the project ended, Miles asked me to dinner at a small restaurant near Sloan's Lake, over warm bread and cheap wine. He listened while I told him about losing my job, walking away from my family, and finding purpose in the ruins. He didn't pity me. He just said, "You don't need their approval. Nora, you already built something they can't touch." And for the first time, I believed it. A few weeks after that dinner, Miles called out of nowhere. His voice carried that steady confidence I was starting to trust. "You ever thought about designing a home that powers itself?" he asked. Something sustainable, small, simple, self-sufficient. I froze. It was the dream I'd buried long ago, the one my father had laughed off when I was still in college. "A fantasy," he'd said. "Real houses don't run on dreams." Now, sitting at my tiny kitchen table with blueprints scattered around me, I felt that old spark return. "Yeah," I whispered. "I've thought about it." Miles chuckled softly. "Then maybe it's time to stop thinking and start building." We called it the Evergreen Project. Within months, we found a 5-acre lot on the Oregon coast, an open clearing where the forest met the sea. The owner, an older widower with kind eyes, told us, "My wife and I planned to build here once, but she passed before we could. Make it something worth living in." He offered it for less than market value. Miles covered the rest. "No strings," he said, "just partnership." We set up a tent near the clearing and began to build from the ground up. Mornings started with coffee on a portable stove. Evenings ended with blisters and laughter by the fire. We used reclaimed wood, solar panels, and a rainwater system. Everything sustainable, everything made from what the world had thrown away just like me. Some days, exhaustion whispered that I'd never finish. But every time I looked at the rising frame of the cabin, I felt something I hadn't in years, peace, the kind that comes when you stop running and start creating. By month 10, the cabin stood complete pale wood, wide windows, a porch that opened toward the ocean. When sunlight hit it, the whole structure glowed like it had its own heartbeat. For the first time, I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was building proof that I'd already won. The morning the past came roaring back. The ocean was calm. Sunlight poured through the wide cabin windows, touching the wooden walls I had sanded by hand. Lavender bloomed along the porch rail, and for the first time in years, my heartbeat matched the rhythm of the waves. I was kneeling in the garden, dirt under my nails, when the sound of tires screeching on gravel tore through the quiet. A silver BMW stopped just short of the gate. The door flew open, and Lena stepped out 2 years older, perfectly styled, trembling like glass about to shatter. Her white dress caught the wind as she clutched her phone. "Dad, you need to come here now!" she shouted before noticing me. I stood slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Jess," I asked, using the nickname I hadn't said in years. Her eyes widened. "You live here?" I nodded, glancing toward the cabin behind me. "Built it myself." She stared around, mouth open, taking in the solar panels, the forest stretching to the cliffs. "They said you lost everything, that you ran off." Guess they were wrong. Her face softened, and for a moment, I saw the little sister I used to protect from our parents' arguments. "After my divorce, I moved back home," she said quietly. "Mom and Dad still pay for everything. Mom keeps saying, 'Don't be reckless like your sister.'" Her voice cracked. "And I listen, because I don't know what else to do." The wind brushed her hair across her face. She looked so small then, like the version of me that never got out. "You have everything," she whispered. "And I don't even know who I am anymore." I looked at her gently. Then, "Stop living for them. Lena, start living for you." She gave a shaky laugh. Easier said than done. We stood in silence until she murmured, "They're on their way." When the SUV appeared minutes later, I already knew how it would feel the ache, the heat in my chest, the old reflex to shrink. Charles stepped out first, face flushed, jaw tight. Elaine followed, trembling behind him. "Where did you get the money for this?" he demanded, scanning the cabin like it was a crime scene. "I built it," I said simply. He barked a laugh. "You expect me to believe that believe whatever you want." I set down my gloves, met his eyes. "From the day you called me a failure, I started collecting something you could never take: my work, my grit, my peace." He blinked, confused, maybe even afraid. "Every insult you threw at me," I said. "Every time you compared me to her, that was capital. And this," I gestured toward the cabin, "is what I built with it." Mom's voice wavered. "We only wanted what's best for you." I laughed softly. "No. You wanted what made you look best." Dad stepped closer, fists clenched. "You did this to humiliate us." "No," I said evenly. "I did it to survive you." The air thickened. Only the ocean spoke. Then Miles stepped out from the cabin, wiping his hands on a rag, calm and steady. He nodded politely to them before standing beside me, wordless, solid, unshakable. For a long moment, no one moved. Then I saw the flicker of something new in my father's eyes. Not anger, not pride, shame. He swallowed hard. "Did you do all this for revenge?" I shook my head. Revenge would mean I still care what you think. I don't. The wind carried the scent of lavender between us. Lena stood off to the side, tears glistening. Dad's shoulders dropped, his voice breaking. We were wrong. Mom began to cry quietly into her hands. "I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. I don't need to forgive you to be free," I said softly. "I already am." They turned back to the SUV. The engine roared to life, gravel spitting beneath the tires as they disappeared down the road. I stood there, heart pounding not from anger, but from release. Miles slipped his arm around me. "You okay?" I looked out toward the trees, where sunlight shifted golden across the cabin walls. "For the first time," I said, completely. A week passed before the letter came. "No return address?" Just my name written in my father's careful handwriting, sharp, deliberate, almost afraid to be opened. I stood by the cabin window for a long time, the envelope trembling slightly in my hand. The ocean murmured outside, steady and endless, like it had been waiting for this moment too. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photo of our old house in Colorado, a for sale sign planted in the front yard. His words were uneven, the ink smudged at the edges. We loved you in the wrong way. It began through fear, through comparison. We taught you to chase love like currency, to earn what should have been given freely. We're selling the house, starting over, and for the first time, we are proud of you not for what you built, but for who you became when no one was watching. I didn't cry. The tears had already done their job years ago. I folded the letter gently, placed it back inside the envelope, and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled of pine and salt, the wind cool against my face. Miles joined me, carrying a small sapling and a shovel. "New roots," he said simply. We planted it near the edge of the clearing, where the land met the sea. I pressed my hands into the earth, feeling the soil cling to my skin the same way pain once had, only this time, it didn't hurt. When we finished, Miles reached for my hand. "You did it, Nora." I looked at the young tree swaying in the wind, sunlight catching its leaves. "No," I whispered. "We did." That evening, as the sun slipped behind the pines, the cabin glowed like a living thing. Miles brought out a small wooden box carved from the first tree we'd cut for the build. Inside was a simple ring, warm and rough at the edges, beautiful in its imperfection. He knelt slightly, voice soft. "Nora Whitfield, will you keep building with me?" I laughed through the tears I didn't know I still had. "Only if we draw the blueprint together." We stood on the porch, watching the light fade across the sea. The wind moved through the trees like a promise. They'd given Lena money. They'd given me silence. But silence had become my foundation, the place I built peace, love, and everything that lasted. Sometimes revenge isn't about making them pay. It's about living so fully that they finally see what they lost.